The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple, in the portico of Solomon. Some of the Jews gathered around him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me. But you do not believe, because you do not belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of my Father's hand. The Father and I are one." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ. It is more of a sensation, really, than an actual active memory. But I have these echoes in my heart and my soul of being a small boy and going with my family to Joliet to see my parents' best friends and their family, the Erickson family, Herb and Ruth. They had both grown up in Andersonville, but Herb was Norwegian and Ruth was Swedish. And somehow they still got married. My parents had met Herb and Ruth back in the Korean War when my father had flown with Herb, in fact, and my mom and Ruth had ended up sharing an apartment together down in the city. 4 Parkin kids, 4 Erickson kids, so we would get together as often as we could. And I remember going down there as a small boy, jumping into the Ford Country Squire LTD with the wood paneling on the side, going down and spending the whole Saturday afternoon into the evening with the Ericksons, the 4 Parkins, the 4 Erickson kids, running around the backyard, playing a little baseball, a little football, a little tetherball. Remember tetherball? I was never very good at it because I was always the shortest, My brothers would taunt me. But we'd spend the whole day eating and laughing and playing and just having a wonderful time together. And then at some point, almost without fail, in the evening, I, as the youngest, would fall asleep on the living room floor or some other inconvenient spot. And when it was time to go home, I have this, again, sensation of my father picking me up, and any of my brothers who'd also fallen asleep, and carrying us out and putting us in the back of the Ford Country Squire LTD with the wood paneling for the ride home. And of in that half awake, half asleep state, hearing and feeling the rumble of the tires, watching the cables, for those of us old enough to remember, for the streetcars that used to run around down Sheridan Road in Rogers Park, seeing them pass by. And then getting home, and my father again picking me up, carrying me inside, and somehow coaxing my rubbery arms and legs into my pajamas, kissing me on the forehead, and putting me to bed. You may have similar memories yourself. You may have taken part as a parent in similar moments. And I know as I've gotten older, I've realized how fortunate I was to have been raised in a family with that kind of love, protection, and care. Not everybody had that experience, I realize, but I did. And for that, I'm profoundly grateful. And that memory, that sensation, is the closest I can come in my own experience to an analogy that parallels what Jesus talks about in our gospel today. When he describes himself as the Good Shepherd, throughout this 10th chapter of John's gospel, Jesus has returned to this image, to this metaphor, saying that he is the door of the sheepfold, that he is the one who keeps away the wolves, the one who protects the sheep. And today he says, the sheep know my voice because they belong to my fold. This is one of the most beloved of all of the images and metaphors that Jesus used, maybe the single most beloved. He describes himself in John's gospel as, the vine and the branches and all sorts of other ways, but it is this image of him as shepherd is the one that we've returned to again and again. In fact, some of the very earliest Christian art portrays Jesus carrying a sheep either around his neck or in his arms. For example, in the catacombs of Domitilla under the streets of Rome, Jesus is portrayed in that first century place as a shepherd. So this image has profoundly moved people for 2,000 years, including our recitation today of the 23rd Psalm, that beloved, familiar, and soothing psalm. And it's not just Jesus. Shepherds play an important part throughout the scriptural story. Remember, Moses was a shepherd who was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro when he saw the burning bush and was called to lead the people of Israel out of bondage in Egypt into the promised land. David was taken from following the flock and anointed as the next king of Israel. Going back even further, Abel, of Cain and Abel fame, Abel was a shepherd until he was put to death by his jealous brother Cain. So again and again, this image of a shepherd is one that has resonated with God's people. And having said that, it's a pretty abstract metaphor for us now, isn't it? It's been a long time since most of us spent any time with a bunch of sheep. And many of us, most of us, maybe almost all of us, are perhaps some generations removed from the farm life overall. So this image of the shepherd is maybe a little abstract. And that's why this memory, this sensation of my Father caring for me, protecting me, watching over me, tending to my needs is one that comes back to me this morning. Now, it is at this point that it's almost required for the preacher to say that sheep are dumb. It's almost a requirement for a sermon. And the reality is, apparently that's true, but that's not what matters. It doesn't matter whether the sheep are dumb. What matters is the shepherd has called them. The issue is not our character. The issue is the relationship with the shepherd. But why does Jesus even bring this image up? Well, the truth is, he has been touring the temple precincts, and he's standing in the portico of Solomon, which was the main gate on the east side of the temple, the only one that was covered, and it was the place from which the kings of Israel used to pronounce judgment and make other announcements. So he's gathered there from the stiff eastern wind, and it's December because they are there during the time of what we now call Hanukkah. And people have been asking him questions, have been following him, have been pestering him, saying, who are you? And finally, they just sort of say, tell us plainly, are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? Are you the one we've been waiting for or not? But it's a trick question. And Jesus knows it's a trick question. He knows that if he says straight up, yes, I am the Messiah, I'm the Holy One, I'm the anointed one you've been waiting for, that in fact, what the people have been waiting for is that warrior, that politician, that one who will throw off timidity and become a great warrior, leader and king of Israel, and oppress the oppressors of Rome and crush them under his feet. And that's not the ministry and the mission to which Jesus is called. But even more, he knows that the very act of asking the question shows that his interlocutors simply won't get it. He says to them, if you haven't believed what I've already done, you're not going to believe anything I say right now. And what has Jesus done by this point in the Gospel of John? Well, among other things, he's turned water into wine. He's healed the son of a centurion. He has made whole a man who had been lame for 38 years. He's walked across the Sea of Galilee. He's fed 5,000 people with a few loaves and a couple of fish. And he's healed a man who was born blind. That's a pretty good resume, isn't it? Pretty good CV. And they still don't understand who he is, that he is the Holy One of God, filled with God's healing, loving, compassionate grace. So nothing he's going to say is going to convince them. They don't want answers. They want to dispute. They want to accuse. So Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. And you don't acknowledge that. You don't understand that because you don't know my voice. You don't belong to my flock. The point being that we don't belong to the flock because we believe. We belong to the flock because he has called us. The issue is not us. The issue is not our character. The question is the relationship. The one who has called us, who knows us, who summons us, who loves us. That's why he goes back to this image again and again and again. And it is a comforting image that there is someone who will protect us from harm and danger even when we don't know it, someone who will enfold us in grace and love even when we're not aware of it, someone who welcomes and holds us even when we might resist, someone who calls us not because we're worthy, not because we've deserved it, not because we've earned membership in the flock, but because he wants us in the flock, which means, and I find this very comforting, that regardless of who I am on any given day, the shepherd still cares for me. There are days, if you're like me, there are days when I believe so fervently I could move mountains, and there are days I have barely enough faith to get out of bed. There are days when I am absolutely as convinced as were the apostles, and there are days when I question every aspect of the creed we're about to say. It's not about me. It's about the shepherd. The shepherd who upholds me even in those times of doubt or anxiety or fear. The shepherd who reaches out and embraces all of us in whatever circumstances we might be. The young person afraid of school because she's being bullied. The wife being abused emotionally at home. The man midway through his career afraid of losing his job. The woman retired who doesn't have a career anymore. The person grieving the loss of a beloved spouse or the end of a relationship. The shepherd is there for all of us. Whatever the circumstance, whatever the situation, even when we don't know it, even when we don't acknowledge it, even when we forget it. It's not really about us. It's about the one who has called us, who loves us, who will protect and preserve, guide and guard, comfort and keep, watch over and walk with us. And so, my woolly friends, we are part of God's flock. We didn't necessarily choose to be here. We were chosen. We didn't earn our way in. We were summoned. We didn't deserve it. We were beckoned and called and named by the shepherd who will not forsake or forget us, by the shepherd who loves and reaches out to us, by the shepherd who enfolds us in grace even in the darkest and most somber moments of our lives, the one who loves us beyond reason and beyond limit, and the one from whose hands we will never be taken.